All right, 2.2 is talking about how to write the equation of a parabola. So if I give you specific parts of a parabola, can you write the equation that goes with it? So now we're kind of going reverse order of graphing, right? So when you were graphing, I gave you everything and you just graphed it. What if I give you the graph? Can you write the equation? So that's what we're working on today. Do you guys recall from Algebra 1? Sometimes you would be given the M and the B, and you'd have to write the equation, right? Or you'd been given a point or something, and you have to write the equation. This is the same concept. So the first thing we need to recall are the two forms of a quadratic function. So the first form that we talked about was called standard form. The first form we talked about was called standard form, and we've talked that it is f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And then what was the other one that we just learned about today? Vertex form, the easy one. F of x equals a times x minus h squared plus k. So we're going to use both of these in our equation today and in our work today. So let's talk about what the properties of A are. Remember that if A, well, first of all, how do we know if it goes up? If A is what?
Negative.
Ooh,
Positive.
positive. If A is positive, the parabola opens up. How do we know if it's down? Brianna? Yep. Hang on, let me... Just a second. Does that work? Okay. Okay, so if A is positive, it's going to open up. And so then, how do we know if it opens down? If it's negative, okay? And then ones that we haven't talked about are whether or not our parabola is going to be wide or skinny. So narrow is another word I suppose you could use there. Previously, I've just said, hey, just open the parabola as you see fit, okay? We haven't really talked about skinny or wide. But we're going to talk about that a little bit in today's lesson. So we know that a parabola is skinny, okay, if the A value is greater than 1. If A value is greater than 1. Okay, or if another way to look at this is if it's a whole number. It can be positive or negative. So how it says A is greater than 1, it can be negative. But when we think about this, we're talking about whole numbers. So if your A value, for example, so we can say example, if A is negative 2, if it's 8, if it's positive 4, anything that's a whole number is going to make your parabola skinny or narrow. Very narrow like this, okay? For it to be wide, we're going to say A is between 0 and 1. So that's what this means. A is greater than 0, but less than 1. Another way to think about this is a fraction. And again, it can be negative even though it says it has to be greater than 0. We're talking about the number itself. So, for example, if you have 1/2, if you have 2/7, if you have 3/8, these are going to be wide. It can be a negative, 3/8. These are going to be a wide parabola. Because it would be as if you were going, this is a way to think about it. This is not how it's actually graphed, but this is a way to think about it. If you were going up 2 and out 7, right? Your parabola would look way like this. Would you guys agree with that? Up to and out 7 if you thought of it as a slope. Okay, it's not a slope, but that's what kind of gives us an idea. Versus what if it was 8 over 1? You would go up 8 and over 1, which means really skinny. Okay? So we're going to need to keep these things in mind as we are graphing and as we are writing our equations. Okay, so we are going to be able to write the equation of a parabola given the vertex and a point that's on the parabola. That sounds really familiar, right? Given the slope and a point that it goes through. Do you guys remember doing that from Algebra 1? Same kind of concept. Okay, there is a process to this, and if you follow the process, you should be good to go. Step number 1. First it says, write the equation of a parabola with a vertex 4, -6, and it goes through the point 3, -3. So the first thing I'd like to do is label. This is my h value, this is my k value. Remember, h and k are the special x and y coordinates of the vertex. And then they gave me this point over here, and I'm going to call it x, comma, y. All right, that's just a regular old point. So step number 1 is to write it in vertex form. And we are going to solve for A. Oops. Solve for A. So write out what vertex form is there. You can either write y or you can write f of x. And again, just like y equals mx plus b, you're going to plug in everything you know. Okay, so what's the y value from our numbers? What's the y value? A -3, right? So I'm going to plug a -3 in there for y. I'm solving for a, so I'm just going to write my a here. What's the x value? 3. Now this is kind of a little bit tricky when we plug in the h value. Remember, we're always doing the opposite of h. Right, good, Kyle. I'm going to put -4 instead of +4. Even though it's a positive 4, when I put it in, I'm actually going to always do the opposite. Don't forget your squared. And then it says plus k, but my k is actually a negative, so plus a negative is really just negative. And now we evaluate this. So we have to be really careful to do order of operations here. What is 3 minus 4? -1. So I have a -1 squared. You can put it on the inside or the outside. It doesn't matter. What's a -1 squared? 1. Now, here's where students get tripped up. This is one term right here. The coefficient is in the back. All right, so in the next step, we're going to put the 1 in front. It's 1 times a, right? And so on the next step, we're just going to put a. You can put 1a if you'd like to, so that you understand where that came from, maybe just for this example. You do not do this first. Look at what I'm drawing up here. You do not do this first, because that's subtraction, and multiplication comes before subtraction, which is why we have to do this first. Okay? So then I have a minus 6. How do we solve this for a? What do we do to get a by itself?
We add 6 to each.
We're going to add 6 to each side. Good, Emily? -3 plus 6, 3. Okay, so step number 1 was to solve for a. Any questions on solving for a? Okay, step number 2 is to plug in a, h, and k. plug in A, H, and K. That's step number 2. So now we're going to write vertex form. Y equals, I'm just going to write the equation. I know you know it already, but I'm just going to write it here so we see where things are getting plugged in at. I now know my A value, I know my H value, and I know my K value. The X and Y that I used were temporary so that I could find the general equation. So my last step, what was my A value? 3. X, is it going to be minus 4 or plus 4? Minus 4 squared minus 6. This would be finished. This looks like what we just graphed, right? Our H and our K, our A value. But now we can write a complete equation. Okay, this looks familiar, like writing equations in y equals mx plus b. This is why, remember how you would plug in the m, the x, and the y to solve for b? You guys remember doing that in Algebra 1? Same concept here where we are solving for a. So if you think you're ready to go, why don't you try example number 2, done exactly like example number 1. Now, save yourself some room on the right side after step number 2 because we're going to use up that space. We're going to do something a little bit different after you get to that point. If you need some help, I'm going to go ahead and do it on the board, and you can check. Don't forget to square. Once you've plugged in your variable, or your letters, your numbers is the word I was looking for there. Once you've plugged in your numbers, why don't you double check that what you have on your paper is what I have on the board, so you don't get too far. That you've plugged everything in the right location. Did you square? Ooh, got to square it.
Possible for A to be a fraction?
It is possible for A to be a fraction. It's a good question.
What about a decimal?
I would prefer you to leave it as a fraction.
So how was it, the way I did it with the calculator, it came out 0.5. So
What is point? Yep. So 18 over 36, or negative 18 over 36, is what? Negative 1/2. Anybody have questions on how we got A to be negative 1/2? I would like you to use 1/2, please. You're in Algebra 2. I know. Anthony?
Why is it one? Oh,
18's on top. Did you get 2 instead?
yeah.
Okay, 18's on top. So remember, when the smaller number's on top, it's going to be a fraction. Okay? Okay, so now we can plug things in. We can plug in A, H, and K to write out what our equation is. So I'm going to plug in for each of these. Cindy is just laughing a storm up over there. I'd rather be in there. I'm just kidding. Laughing. Okay, is our H positive or negative when we plug it in, Crystal?
H.
Yeah. Is it going to be x plus 2 or x minus 2?
Plus 2.
Plus 2. Good, because we always do the opposite. Squared plus 5. Raise your hand if this is the equation that you have. Good. Anybody have questions who did not get this? Okay, so now that we have this in vertex form, right over here to the right, make yourself a note that this is vertex form. We're going to change this into standard form. Okay, so once you've written it in vertex form, we're going to change this into standard form. All right? So you've done the hard part. Now we just got to, we have to expand this equation. Does anyone know how we might expand this to write it in standard form? Anybody have any guesses? What is that x plus 2, Patrick?
Are you going to remove the 1/2 over?
We are going to distribute the 1/2, but not yet. What does that x plus 2 squared really mean?
X plus 2 times x.
Okay, so we are going to break this apart to be x plus 2 times x plus 2. I'm going to bring down the rest of my equation. But first, I'm going to multiply x plus 2 times x plus 2. So off to the side, however you do it, whether it's the box or distributive or whatever, x plus 2 times x plus 2, go ahead and multiply together. We'll make sure we get the same thing. Again, if you FOIL or you do the box, whatever, multiply those two together. If you're not sure, you can follow along in the box with me. X times x gives you x squared. 2 times x gives you 2x. 2 times x again gives you 2x. And 2 times 2 is 4. So this becomes x squared plus 4x plus 4. Is that what you guys are getting? I'll pause for a minute. Okay, now, Patrick, what was your idea?
Are you going to plus the 1/2 over?
Okay, are we going to add 1/2 over, or are we going to distribute the negative 1/2? Yeah, let's distribute the negative 1/2. Do not do this part first, because that 4 is still in captivity in the parenthesis. Okay? That 4 still is going to have to be multiplied by the negative 1/2 first. Now, before you turn to your calculator, what is half of 1?
25 or 1 over here.
Just 1/2, right? Anything times 1 is itself. So this is just negative 1/2 x squared. What is half of 4? 2. So this is a minus 2x. Again, what is half of 4? A negative 2. Is this 1/2 going to go all the way to the 5? No, because it's not in parentheses. Good. So now I'm just going to add my 5 onto the end. Now I can take care of this. Negative 1/2 x squared minus 2x plus 3. This is now in standard form.
What way do you want us to write it?
So on your homework, the first 4, you're going to stop here with vertex form. Okay? And then the second 4 in your homework, you find vertex form first and then move it into standard form. Can you, I want you to do it on your paper. So we're not finished yet. Flip over. Okay, the next example is just a graph. So can we write an equation just from a graph? What do you think? Probably, right? Otherwise I wouldn't ask you if we could. Okay, so can you still write an equation? We need a vertex, and what else do we need when we're doing this? Not to write the equation, we need our vertex, and what else do we need? Any point that it goes through, right? So let's find our vertex here. We know how to find a vertex. Yep. Yep, that's fine. You'll be able to do.
Which one's, what's homework?
Okay, so on this one, you're gonna just start at number 5. Okay, these are review, so we can work on that later. On number 5.
Hang on just a second. Okay, so we need a vertex. What point is that? What'd you say? 3, 5. So off to the side somewhere I'm going to write my vertex is 3, 5. And then I need a point. So what point does this go to? Go through, I mean. Any ideas of what point this actually goes through? There's a couple of them because we want to make sure it's the exact grid. So if you look at this picture, it goes through this point over here or this point right here. Do you guys see these 2 points that I just made on the graph? It goes exactly through either one of those, and it doesn't matter which point you choose. You should get the same answer, okay? So this side of the room, look at me. This side of the room, I want you guys to use the point 6, 8. That side of the room, I want you guys to use the point 0, 8. Okay? So you're going to do it just like you did on the back. We're just doing vertex form. We're using the vertex and the point that I assigned you. So you guys are using 6, 8 over here. That side of the room is using 0, 8. We'll see if we get the same answer. We should. So step number 1 is to write it in vertex form. We're going to solve for A. That's step number 1. Solving for A. I'm just drawing mine like this because I'm going to work it both ways so that we can make sure we get the same answer. Okay? Yeah, who said that? Josh? Yeah, you're 0, 8. What is 3 over 9 reduced to? 1/3. So your A value is 1/3, whichever way you did that. If you did not get 1/3, check your answer with what I have. Once you get A to be 1/3, okay, plug it back in and write your equation. So do step number 2, which is writing your equation.
That's your big one.
Once you get done writing your equation, check your answer with your neighbor. If you don't have someone sitting right beside you, check behind you or around you, beside you, above you, below you,
Are we
whatever.
starting on the test screen? That's all I have with this one.
Okay, but you need to have the X and the Y. You need to make that an X instead.
Oh.
So I should have 1/3 x minus 3, because we do the opposite of h, plus 5. Any questions on that one?
What did you say? Put it next. You're gonna put your X next. You write your final equation.
Okay, I want you to do example number 4 with your neighbor. I want you guys to find the same point to use. And I want you to find your vertex. And I want you to do example 4 in standard form.
Because it was negative, so we plug it in positive. Whenever we plug our agent, this is a positive, so we plug it in the label negative. And plug it in on the
Okay, choose a vertex and a point. For example 4. I mean, you don't get to choose a vertex. The vertex is what it is. Please make sure you're choosing an actual coordinate point, not one that... There are a couple ones that you can choose. I will make sure that you're finding the right ones. Again, you should be working with your neighbor on this, or someone around you, to make sure you're using the same point.
Neighbor.
There are 3 points that you can choose. So you're going to choose any one of these 3 points. Right, this one's your vertex, so you have to use this one as your vertex, your H and K. And then you can choose any one of these 3 points to use as the other point. This one might be easiest, right, because it's 0, 1. I would use that one.
16 divided by 4. Yeah, I know that. When you multiply negative numbers, like negative times negative equals positive.
Did you write it in standard form?
What the heck?
Moving on into standard form.
So you factor this little.
Look back at the example we did.
I know what you did. You factored it.
Not a factor.
Foil.
Yeah, more, yes, which is different than factor.
This one's already missed.
Right, but what did we do here? We split that up by x plus 2 and x plus 2. We wrote it twice, and then we had to multiply. So you're going to do the same thing. Your a value should be what? What'd you guys get? Negative 1/4 should be your a value. Negative 1/4 should be your a value. Because if you subtract 5, you get negative 4 equals 16.
Oh, yeah.
A is negative 1/4. You need help, ask your questions. I choose a different number, but you should still get the same answer. I choose a different point probably than you. Yep. Now you're going to multiply, which is the same thing as dividing each of these by 4. Well, 1/4 times 1 is just 1/4, right? What's 8 times 4? It's 16. Maybe 1/4? Okay, but 4 minus 2. Where's your... Why do you have 4 minus 2 and 4 minus 2? Okay, so your y value is 4. You don't know your a. Your x value is 2. This is your x value. This is h and k. And it might be helpful if you labeled h and k because you got to mix around. That's the problem. Yep. 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 It's negative 4. Okay, now combine that together.
I don't think that's how you do it. Like, I mean, I just don't think that's how I did it.
This is correct. So it's negative 4, negative 4. Okay, so it's squared, it's not squared, it's x. So x squared minus 8x plus 16. Now that's all in parentheses. And you have your negative 1/4. Yep. Now distribute your negative 1/4 through, which is the same thing as dividing 4. Multiplying by 1/4 is the same thing as dividing by 4. Super.
From your device? I thought it was equal.
X minus 4 times x minus 4 gives you x squared minus 8x plus 16. Make sure your signs are right. And then we're going to distribute that negative 1/4 through. And again, multiplying by negative 1/4 is the same thing as dividing by 4. So I have negative 1/4 x squared. What is 8 divided by 4? What?
1/2.
2. 8 divided by 4 is 2, and it's a positive 2x.